immediate aftermath of public figures dying, unless they're genocidal maniacs like, Hitler or Mao or Stalin, Hogan, there should be a modicum of respect for the death of a human being. And my issue with this, it doesn't just relate to the left.
Tell that to Donald Trump.
Well, I was going to make the point. I mean, Hogan, I presume you would be appalled by the reaction from many on the left to Lindsey Graham's death, as I have been.
There aren't many on the left.
But of course, there are many, actually. I've seen so much of it online.
And it's honestly, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, honestly, every prominent Democrat
it is disgusting. It was after Charlie Kirk got murdered. It is disgusting. However, my question...
You didn't call Donald Trump disgusting, Piers.
What's up, everybody? Jackson here. And this is one of those moments where a live TV gotcha completely backfires on the person who set it up. Piers Morgan asked Mehdi Hasan point blank, on air, whether he's sad that Senator Lindsey Graham died. Mehdi doesn't flinch, says no, and then explains exactly why. Walking through Graham's actual voting record on wars in the Middle East, rather than giving the polite hagiography most cable news does when a powerful person dies. What makes this genuinely interesting is what happens next. Mehdi turns the question back on Piers, asking whether he'd apply the same standard of give it a day or two of respect to how Donald Trump has talked about people like Robert Mueller after they've died. I want to break down where Mehdi's argument holds up and where it's fair to push back. Because there's a real question here about consistency in how we talk about the dead. Stick with me, get that like in, get subscribed, because we go through moments like this in full now. Let's get into it.
Benjamin Netanyahu and others persuaded him to do this ridiculous war. And now we're in this stupid war where oil prices are up. He also said, by the way, Hogan, you remember, he said, I'm going to end inflation on day one. We're going to bring prices down. Instead, we've got gas prices going up and up and up because the Iranians know if they hold out for the midterms, it's going to hurt Trump and the Republicans. They have their own incentive for keeping this going. And Piers, I don't know if I said it on this show or another show, but I said, this war is not over when the MOU was signed, when the so-called ceasefire was done.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought it was. I honestly think Donald Trump is scrabbling to find an exit ramp, and he's finding it really hard because the Iranians...
escalating to exit is not a good move.
But you don't think 47 years of terror and October 7th was a good enough reason to...
So why didn't he say that on the campaign trail, Hogan? Why didn't he say, I'm going to become president and I'm going to go to war with Iran to punish them for 1979?
Well, actually, I would say, I would look at it differently. Look, you've got a lot of bad actors around the world. You've got North Korea, you've got Russia, you've got China, you've got others, right? And America doesn't march in and attack all those countries for good reason, right? Simply being a bad regime, as we learned...
Also, they have nukes, Piers.
Well, as we learned...
They have nukes,
I know, that's the point. But the principle should be the same. I remember with the Iraq War debate in 2003, I opposed that very vociferously. Because I just thought this makes no sense. And it backfired horribly and had 20 years of mayhem and led to the rise of ISIS and so on. You don't necessarily have to march in and attack bad actors in regions. Now, I will never defend a thing this regime has done in Iran. They're a despicable, awful regime that oppresses its people, and they've clearly supplied arms and resources to a bunch of terror groups in the Middle East. All of that is inarguable. But my concern from day one, and I said it on day one, is what is the war objective here? Is it to get rid of the regime? And if it isn't, the very last thing you should want to do at the end of this war is empower the regime. And I have a horrible feeling that by working out the unexpectedly huge impact of being able to control the Strait of Hormuz, this Iranian regime now feels more emboldened and more powerful than it did 4 months ago. That's my honest problem with this.
Foreign policy, as you know, is fraught with a whole bunch of different issues. I've traveled with the president all over the world. We went to North Korea, actually, China, et cetera, to deal with some of the geopolitical threats that this country faces. Now, they're not imminent threats. They're more economic. They're not military in nature, in that they're not doing kinetic activity in the moment and funding terrorism to try and kill Americans, which Iran, as you pointed out, clearly has done. But most news reports pretty clearly have pointed out different pockets within this Iranian regime. And as Donald Trump said, we kind of did get rid of the regime because we killed everybody in line for control of Iran. However, there are two basically competing groups. One, very militant. I'm going to use the word old school to define, use the words old school to define them. They're the ones who really want to continue down the path of death and destruction, stated goals of killing Americans, killing Jews, etc., versus ones who may be a little bit more moderate. And I guarantee you this administration has spoken to both factions in both groups. It appears that when we do move toward a memorandum of understanding, it's because we've had conversations with those who tend to be a little bit more sensible and maybe care about the well-being of their own people. And then, of course, those who don't, who have killed many tens of thousands of their own people, tend to take control by striking targets, killing civilians, and then Donald Trump has to change.
This reminds me, you know what this reminds me of, though? Hogan, it reminds me of the scorpion and the frog tale, which I won't repeat because everybody knows it, but it reminds me about the scorpion. Scorpions tend to behave like scorpions. I just want to end very quickly, Mehdi, because we run out of time.
Hold on. Just on the Iran point, I've got to say very quickly.
No, you can't. You can't, because I've got another guest waiting.
Well, I waited half an hour to come on this show, and then you'd save my vocal cord. So let me just say this. The Iranian regime, to say there's been regime change in Iran is gaslighting of the highest order.
I agree.
We've replaced Ayatollah Khamenei with Ayatollah Khamenei, a more radical, hardline version, who has much more of an incentive to get
Mehdi, I agree with you 100%. So let's forget that. I just want to ask you very finally, Mehdi, are you sad that Senator Lindsey Graham has died?
No, I'm not sad. I'm not celebrating it either, as you suggested in your introduction. I think it's a bit of a straw man to say everyone's celebrating his death. I think as journalists, Piers, you and I, we hold power accountable. We speak truth to power. I'm not of the school that says when a politician dies, a public figure dies, we treat them like a private figure and just shut up. I don't think journalism should turn into hagiography. At Zeteo, for example, we published a list of what Graham said and did. We just let the facts speak for themselves. He was a man who said awful things, genocidal things, racist things, and we put that on the record for people to see. That doesn't mean he didn't also do, I'm sure, good things in Congress as well, but overwhelmingly he argued for wars, including this Iran war that outlives him, that killed 100 schoolgirls on day one of the war. He argued for the Iraq war that you and I opposed, that killed over 1 million people. He never met a Middle East country he didn't want to invade, and I think that's how we should remember him. We should remember the full record. The problem is when powerful people die, people in our media, especially mainstream corporate media, want to just do hagiography and say, what a wonderful person they were. Weren't they lovely? And I'm sure many of those powerful people were lovely and they have families who love them. But as journalists, our job is to say, here's what they did. Here's the truth about their life and record. Here's an accurate obituary. And with Lindsey Graham, the man has a ton of blood on his hands and we shouldn't just forget that.
No one's asking anyone to forget the record of politicians, but I do think in the immediate aftermath of public figures dying, unless they're genocidal maniacs like, Hitler or Mao or Stalin, Hogan, there should be a modicum of respect for the death of a human being. And my issue with this, it doesn't just relate to the left.
Tell that to Donald Trump.
Well, I was going to make the point. I mean, Hogan, I presume you would be appalled by the reaction from many on the left to Lindsey Graham's death, as I have been.
There aren't many on the left.
But of course, there are many, actually. I've seen so much of it online.
And it's honestly, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, honestly, every prominent Democrat
it is disgusting. It was after Charlie Kirk got murdered. It is disgusting. However, my question...
You didn't call Donald Trump disgusting, Piers. You didn't call Donald Trump disgusting.
If you let me do my
when
job
he said it about Rob Reiner.
If you let me host my own show, I was about to
let me speak an equal amount of time, I will.
Ask Hogan Gidley if, given that we should all be able to condemn the reaction of the left to the death of Lindsey Graham and to Charlie Kirk and others on the right, would you also condemn the way that Donald Trump has talked about Robert Mueller, Rob Reiner and others that he doesn't like who die when he trashes them in public quite quickly? Because I never like him doing that. I always think it's wrong, particularly given he's the President of the United States.
Well, do you condemn what they said and lied about Donald Trump as well? Both Rob Reiner and Robert Mueller?
Well, I don't think that's a relevant point. Everyone's entitled to criticize the President of the United States. The point is, should the President use his pulpit to attack Rob Reiner when he's just been murdered? I don't think he should.
Those people have attacked him. He responded in kind. Listen, I was executive director of the South Carolina Republican Party in Lindsey Graham's era. I've known the man for a long time. Was he right on every issue? Did I agree with him on every issue? No. But he loved his country. He loved his constituents in the state of South Carolina. He loved being a United States senator.
So did Robert Mueller.
You can hate his policies. You can not like some of his votes. I got crossways with him a couple of times. Remember, in the first Trump administration, he wasn't on board with Donald Trump's closed border policies by any stretch. On the North Lawn, I said when I was at the state party in South Carolina, he got.
Let's get into the actual argument here, because underneath the tension, there's a real journalistic question. What do we owe public figures when they die? And does that obligation apply equally, regardless of politics? Mehdi's position was specific. He wasn't celebrating Graham's death, and he pushed back directly on the framing that he was. His actual argument was that journalism shouldn't default to uncritical praise the moment a powerful person dies, that an honest accounting of someone's public record, including the parts that are uncomfortable, is more respectful of the truth than a sanitized obituary. He backed that with a specific claim about Graham's record on Middle East interventions, including support for the Iraq War, which by most estimates resulted in a very large civilian death toll, and general support for US involvement in various regional conflicts. Whether you agree with characterizing that record as he did is a judgment call, but the underlying voting record itself is publicly checkable and worth verifying directly rather than taking anyone's characterization, including mine, at face value. Hogan Gidley's response was also a fair one on its own terms, that knowing someone personally over a long career often reveals a more complicated picture than a list of controversial votes, and that public service, even when you disagree with specific decisions, is still worth acknowledging. Both things can be true. A person can be a dedicated public servant to their constituents and also have a foreign policy record that cause real harm. That's not a contradiction, it's just a complicated legacy, which is true of most long-serving politicians. The sharpest moment, though, is the consistency question Mehdi raised about Piers specifically, pointing to a tweet where Piers had called reactions to Graham's death despicably cruel and asking whether that same standard was ever applied when Trump has publicly attacked people shortly after their deaths. That's a fair test to apply to anyone claiming a principle. If give the dead a beat of respect is the standard, it should hold regardless of whose ally died. I don't have the specific tweets or statements in front of me to verify exactly how consistent that record is, so I'd encourage checking the actual public statements on both sides before accepting either characterization wholesale. Here's what I think the real takeaway is. Let's not speak ill of the dead, and let's tell the truth about a public record aren't actually opposites, but they get treated as if they are whenever it's politically convenient. The test of whether someone actually holds that standard consistently is whether they'd apply it the same way regardless of which political figure just died. So tell me, do you think there should be a mandatory pause before criticizing a public figure's record after they die? Or is Mehdi right that an honest record matters more than a comfortable silence? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this, get subscribed and let's get this channel to 100,000.